Ball. Step on him. Oh my gosh. Yo, you gotta guard him. Yo, I'm done. I'm not playing no more. Give me the ball. Get out the way, Desmond. I told you I'm not playing no more. Do what you gotta do. You ain't get it past me. I warned you.
All right, you got me. Come on, you got me. What? What the? Yo, what is this? Turn me back!
Yo,
Turn me back!
What'd I do?
Cross me! Do something! Cross me! Come on, cross me again!
Hold on. Nah, man, I wasn't this color, bro. Hey, change me back. Change me back, Caleb, come on. Yo, you gotta see a doctor, man. No, that's not me. Yo, that's not me.
That's pretty great, right? You know, it's interesting, creative, energetic, and most importantly, funny. But how? What does he do to make these videos work on so many levels and so consistently? Well, let's look a bit deeper. If you've been around YouTube long enough, or if you remember Vine, you may have heard of this guy, CalebCity. By now, one of the most popular and highly regarded skit creators on all of YouTube, consistently offering some of the most creative, entertaining, and downright hilarious sketches covering all kinds of topics. From Venus flytraps and superhumans to domestic violence and anime villains, Caleb's videos seem limitless, not only in their ideas, variety, and innovation, but also in their potential, despite an apparently mundane and minimal production. Regardless of the budget or effects or crew, his videos nearly always astonish his viewers and seem to never disappoint even the harshest fans. But in such a saturated market, where it seems nearly every other day a new channel arises and where constant threats present themselves, how does Caleb supersede it all? On a platform with competition as stiff as RDC World 1, Lenarr, LongBeachGriffey, Berleezy, Nileseyy Niles, and LeanandCuisine, each showcasing their own unique strengths, styles, and content, why does CalebCity hold the title as the best skit channel on YouTube? Well, categorically, I'd say there are three main reasons his videos are consistently so successful. The same three parts that make up any movie or TV show, good or bad. The first being the components of the stories themselves. You know, the writing, characters, and dialogue. These elements are what you remember the video being about. They create the premise and the direction of the story. The second, and perhaps most differentiating reason, being the way he enhances those elements through the visuals and sound. You know, the editing, the effects, and cinematography, etc. These elements are the execution of the video and are often what make it stand out as you watch it. They enhance the experience itself, allowing a more creative, concise, and effective presentation of the elements in the first category. The third part is what I like to call the synthesis, the combination or application of some or all of the previous elements into a well-rounded, cohesive, and recognizable sequence or video. And so, with each aspect having such a prolific impact on the enjoyment of his skits, I'm going to break this video into three parts, exploring the two distinct but equally important levels of CalebCity's comedic sketches, as well as the intricate synthesis of those elements that work together to create his wholly unique, advanced, and unforgettable style.
Oh, we quiet now. That's crazy. We finally got a moment of silence, y'all.
Oftentimes, especially with short videos, the premise directs much of what follows. Though it can be challenging, the main idea usually dictates the kinds of characters we'll see, the dialogue they'll speak, and the paths they'll follow. Of course, how you execute these elements greatly impacts the overall tone and atmosphere of the piece, the genres it falls into, and the way the audience views them. And with every creator implementing either slightly or drastically different techniques, everyone consequently has his or own unique style, and Caleb is no different. Rare to Caleb though, his ideas often lend themselves to some parallel dimension, some world that appears different from our own either immediately or upon closer inspection, with comparatively over-the-top or mundane characters and dialogue pushing us through extraordinary events occupied by seemingly normal characters, seemingly normal events with extraordinary characters, or sometimes even both.
Hey, hold on. Is that a human? Is that a human? Observe.
In his most memorable videos, there's often a contrast in his premises, a misunderstanding between or among characters, a place where he often cleverly inserts humor. Think of the interviewees and the interviewer in Superhuman Interview, or the wasp and the other insects in If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves. Not only do these videos center around otherworldly concepts, such as superhumans and talking insects, but they treat them as normal. They're left unexplained. Regardless of how outlandish the subject matter is, Caleb establishes his premises through the lens of humans and makes them relatable. This tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary often creates a few laughs on its own, as well as an entire narrative motif that recurs throughout his videos, resulting in a sort of comedic Twilight Zone in the the way he combines the mundane with the extraordinary. But the concepts are only part of the equation. A creator also has to bring it to life through other components that establish and develop it. Here, we get a deeper look at some of the ways Caleb incorporates several techniques through his dialogue, characters, and narratives to liven the worlds he creates in his videos. Let's start with his dialogue.
You get me the president. What? You want the president of the company? Of the United States of America?
The dialogue is often the most apparently funny aspect of a YouTube skit. In my eyes, it's the most common way of delivering a joke and revealing how a character feels, who the character is, and pushing the plot forward. However, I also feel that despite its prevalence in video making, it's somewhat overused and overrated. Too often, people over-rely on dialogue to convey their messages and evoke emotions, either completely disregarding or simply underusing other aspects of filmmaking in favor of the much simpler and easier choice. But Caleb is an exception. Rather than focusing solely on words, he often complements his dialogue through surrounding production and planning, his acting, cinematography, and editing. However, his dialogue does have a profound effect on the success of a video, working cohesively alongside other elements to produce a more well-rounded and effective product. Sometimes even, the dialogue is the focus of the video, but regardless of how significant a role it plays, Caleb has a variety of techniques that enhance the dialogue itself or enrich his videos as a whole through the dialogue. For example, he often uses inner thoughts narration to bring us into the mind of a particular character, and usually also to emphasize the emotions he's feeling juxtaposed against the situation.
Here's your food. And just let me know if you need anything else. Enjoy your meal.
Thanks, you too.
I'm stupid. I looked that man directly in his eyes and said something stupid. Why do I keep talking?
He uses the character's thoughts to illustrate and, oftentimes, have the character reflect on his own actions or situation, amplifying the emotion of the character, tone of the scene, and, in turn, the humor found in the space and interaction between the two. Caleb also creates over-the-top and caricature dialogue, seen, for example, in What They Should Do in anime.
Yes, go back there and get me my empowerment gems. Then I will use them to take over this filthy planet. I hate everyone. Everyone will bow to my knees. I will destroy this whole land. I hate it. I hate them. Ha ha!
Here, Caleb's dialogue supports the satirical tone he's created. Alongside his delivery, his words exaggerate the character and make fun of anime villains. The simplicity of the sentences and specific connotation and familiarity of the words, especially the ones that remind you of particular shows, emotions, or ideas like filthy and hate, makes the satire even more apparent and easily understood. This is important because it adds another complementary component to the focus of the video, making it more complete, and with such short videos, usually under 3 or 4 minutes, you have to make sure to be efficient and support the purpose in seemingly indirect ways because you typically don't have as much time to flesh out your ideas. Another technique Caleb often uses is simple, conclusive statements. Following a series of events meant to establish a certain situation or status quo, he often has the character say something that simply or reductively states their mindset, the current environment, or a conclusion based on the evidence we've been presented with up to this point. Sometimes, a line of dialogue may even accomplish more than one at the same time. For example, in When You Just Wanted to Help Your Friend with His Diss Track, the rapper bluntly says,
Nigga, I will punch your grandma!
This simply states the rapper's aggressive, unrestrained state of mind. For such an absurd idea, it's so blunt and matter-of-fact and completely opposite to what you'd expect that you can't help but laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. It's so extreme and over the top. It's great. In How They Feel at the Drive-Thru but at 3:20 a.m., the employee simply and with little spoken build-up says,
I hate you.
I know.
This statement relates to the current environment and is a result of the purpose of the video in that the driver is going to a restaurant at such an inconvenient time. Knowing the title and understanding that someone probably shouldn't be at that place at that time, we already feel the scene's annoyed tone before we even hear any dialogue. So when the employee speaks, the dialogue is so perfectly simple and with an especially sharp, violent delivery that it matches the established tone of the scene up to this point, and we can't help but laugh at both the situation and the pitiful driver. In The First Plant to Become a Venus Flytrap, the plant reductively states,
I'm tired of drinking. I want to chew.
In this clip, the Venus Flytrap makes a rather conclusive statement about himself, justifying the information we had been presented with earlier. Throughout the early parts of the video, his subtle aggression had been contrasted with the other plant's friendliness. So when he finally retorts and says he's tired of drinking, we not only understand what he means, but we also could have predicted not only what he was thinking, but also what he wants to do next. It was the logical conclusion, and the simplicity of the line only made the contrast between the flytrap and the other insects more abrupt, and, in turn, funnier. These are only a few examples though. He has many other applications as well. For instance, he asks questions the audience would also or may be currently asking.
Now expunging all of your bank account funds.
Why do you even have the authority to do that?
To your MySpace account.
To direct our focus to the conflict of the video and the outlandish nature of the situation. He also explains certain situations or characters. He'll introduce a joke and then go deeper into it, elevating the comedy.
You mean like intimate? Oh nah, I be striking her like I be hitting her like she a stranger, bro. Like let me demonstrate. Look, wait, what we got it? Here, hold this pillow. Actually, stand up real quick. Stand up. I wanted to get back on the game. Like I be like, but like way harder, like this pillow, her face. This pillow is her face.
He does this to push us further into the very specific moments of the situation. Not only is he directing our attention to the absurdity of what's already happened or still happening, but he is putting us into the mind of a character who is fixated on something else.
Oh, bro,
Yeah.
what?
Now get out.
Wait, you did that by punching me?
Yeah, pick him up.
You did that by punching me?
Yeah, peel
Oh
him
my
off of my
gosh.
couch right now.
Wow. Bro, your hits are astounding.
Yeah, both of y'all
Oh my
out.
gosh, bro.
Now you get to pick him up and take him out with you.
Wake up,
Yeah.
bro.
Now you get to
gotta
carry
go.
him to the car.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
In a way, he's simultaneously pulling us away from the events and towards a character who is now focused on something other than the original conflict, the surrounding characters or the audience itself. It works because despite the situation being so extreme, the character still misses or ignores the severity of it and simply treats it as an inconvenience. Now that I've explained a few ways Caleb incorporates dialogue and how it affects his videos, I now want to talk about what delivers the dialogue. Characters.
He gonna say my songs are trash. Your songs are trash. Play the beat. He gonna say I'm garbage.
Are you ready now?
Play the beat. Play the beat.
Characters progress the story through their actions and words, and in Caleb's videos, they're often surrogates used to represent ideas, both mundane and outlandish. They reinforce the concepts presented in the video and oftentimes establish the central focus, whether that be a contrast between two or more characters or groups, or the exaggeration of them to caricatures so ridiculous they satirize the ideas that they represent. Caleb's characters are generally very introspective in that they often say or do things directly in reference to themselves or their situation, how they think and where they are. They also create contrast among themselves, most often between a pair. This specific contrast is called the double act, a pairing of two characters. The straight man, who reacts to strange or unexpected events like most people would, and the comic, who often creates the outrageous events or reacts to them in a strange, unexpected way. You've almost definitely seen this used in comedies before, and Caleb himself has repeatedly used this approach throughout the years. In basically how trying to stay neutral is, as in many other videos, he uses this approach, where one character acts over the top and mostly unrealistic while the other guy simply responds to his actions in an expected way. The audience can place themselves in his shoes because he acts like most people would and is perplexed by the ridiculousness around him and the fact that his actions are responded to in such an exaggerated way, like they're in two completely different universes, creates a separation between the characters, and since one character represents the audience, it also creates a separation between the ongoing conflict and the audience as well, creating a funny contrast. As I briefly described earlier, Caleb often creates caricatures, but instead of dissecting the dialogue of those characters, I now want to talk about their characteristics.
I will destroy this whole land. I hate it. I hate them.
Here, Caleb references other, more dramatic works and satirizes their overly serious and extreme tone and style. He exaggerates their movements, facial expressions, and gestures to draw attention to their obvious and, in this case, villainous character and the seemingly ludicrous idea that nobody can tell they are villains or recognize their villainous traits.
Oh, nah. You a villain? What? No. Nah, you a whole villain. I can see it on your face. No, I can see the theme song on your face. No, you're not getting these. No!
Despite the exaggeration though, the character still feels like another character you may have actually seen, drawing your attention to the absurdity that they somehow accomplish certain things while being so dramatic and clearly evil. Since Caleb's videos also often rely on the relationship between two characters, he has to make sure they don't start to feel repetitive, and with so many videos, that can be difficult. So, to deal with this, he creates characters that are almost entirely defined by the story and their situation. This creates a nearly inseparable connection between the character and the story, making the characters seem as diversified as the stories themselves, even if they may have many similar characteristics. If the story is about rappers, we focus on how they can rap. If the situation is a villain going to buy some gems, we focus on their villainy. He doesn't try to flesh them out much, and other than their relationship to the specific ongoing story, we know little else about them. And while it may seem like that only limits their variability, it actually allows for a far more focused connection to the ongoing story. We aren't too distracted by the character's history, outside relationships, or currently unrelated goals. Instead, we adhere to the focus of the video and make a more concise, focused final product. Sometimes though, Caleb adds more than 2 characters to make a more complex dynamic and conflict between them. In How Trying to Stay Neutral Is, Caleb plays 3 characters, and even though one character goes entirely unseen, he's still able to create a complex dynamic wherein 2 characters are arguing before asking the third for his thoughts on the matter. The fact that there are 3 characters instead of 2 allows him to force a character to choose between the other characters. This, in turn, creates a funny dynamic when that choice is rendered useless. Having more than 2 characters enabled him to reveal a plot twist, which was only set up because of this seemingly important but still false choice between characters.
Do you believe that everybody should get at least an hour of exercise a day? I mean, I guess, yeah, an hour a day would be more healthy. See, he agrees. He agrees that your parents are a waste of f***ing space. But
characters only further the story. I now want to talk about the stories themselves and how Caleb sets them up, advances through them in his videos, and why they're important.
I managed to steal the key before I stole it, and implant it into the banana that you would swap it with. The one that you have is a fake replica key that I made.
I talked a bit about Caleb's ideas earlier, but here I want to talk about the specifics of those ideas, the techniques he uses to walk us through these stories, and the impact those techniques have on our experience. Caleb has created countless stories in his YouTube career, some more complex than others, but each one showcasing some veil of relatability. His stories tend to be very singular, driving along a linear path to a single point, where they reach a climax. Though it isn't always the case, his videos often escalate towards a single, clear purpose and end after it's achieved. Sometimes though, they repeat and reveal something new or surprising with each repetition. For example, Caleb often creates escalating stories. In Dropping Anything in the Bathroom, the friend that's always forgetting something, and especially people that think the manager can change anything, which is based almost entirely around escalation, the situations become increasingly ridiculous or strange. He does this to test our suspension of disbelief, to stretch it until it becomes so much more odd than we expected, or so much more extreme than the beginning of the video that we can't help but laugh, especially when he incorporates an unexpected jump. We know the situation is escalating, but we may not realize when it will escalate next, or how much of a jump it will make from the previous escalation, and Caleb plays with this ignorance. He often has the final escalation much more extreme than the previous ones. In The Friend That's Always Forgetting Something, he ends the video by having the friend forget the keys to the car he is currently driving, making for a far more ridiculous and basically impossible situation.
I forgot the keys to the car. Nigga, what? Where were the keys when he started the car? Oh my god. Oh my god. And he don't even know how amazing this is. Nigga, I am perplexed.
The build-up makes the end even more absurd because even though we expected something to happen, this was far more ridiculous and extreme than we anticipated. Caleb also creates repetition throughout his stories. In both If NPCs Had No Human Interaction and When You Gotta Question Your Own Intelligence, Caleb repeats certain actions, such as NPCs responding robotically and a character reflecting on his lack of intelligence as he calls himself stupid, to exaggerate the ideas that those actions represent. Exaggeration often creates comedy because it allows us to more easily see the seemingly insignificant aspects of something by expanding it and making it more apparent. It allows us to clearly see how ridiculous it truly is. Caleb also often breaks the patterns he establishes. In If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves, he goes from fairly harmless or apparently benevolent creatures in a fly to an ant to a bee, and then he breaks the pattern by suddenly moving to a wasp. Instead of continuing with the pattern of helpful insects, he breaks it by inserting a violent wasp. Breaking the pattern not only allows for a quick, unexpected change, but it also allows for an interesting contrast. He had already set up the helpful insects, so when he brought in the wasp, the contrast was quickly apparent. The contrast created by this pattern breaking also makes the wasp stand out more. If Caleb had only included violent insects like the wasp, it would have had far less impact. Many times, if you want to make something pop, place something oppositional against it to make its presence more chaotic and extreme in comparison to its environment and the characters around it. Here, Caleb once again uses contrast to deliver a joke, but this time he does so through the drastic shift in a pattern. Now that we've explained how CalebCity creates his world and stories and adds humor to them through dialogue, characters, and narrative, let's discuss the way he enhances those elements. Anyone can come up with something funny. An interesting concept, characters, even dialogue can arrive in anyone's mind, regardless of experience. But the difficulty comes in the execution of those ideas. How will you present it? What's the best way to deliver a joke? How should you frame your actors? When should you cut? What music should you use? Two people could have the exact same script, actors, camera, composers, setting, and props, but still produce two unbelievably different films, and it's here, during the execution, where we often see someone's style. We remember the extreme close-ups, the insert shots, the music, the cross-cutting. During this stage, we get a much better feel for the unique ways creators express themselves with the stories they already have. And here's where I think Caleb really shines. He often does a phenomenal job of expanding his ideas into cohesive and concise narratives, or making them more entertaining than they themselves may initially appear.
What? Literally everyone's been doing that their entire life!
He does this primarily through his visuals, music, editing, and acting, as well as a collection of motifs made of those elements. But let's start with his visual storytelling.
Funny you should say that, because I knew you would make a fake key. So I stole the fake key that you made and swapped it with the real one. So that when you inevitably swap the real one with the fake one, you would actually put the real one back in its place.
There is an untold number of things you can do with the camera, and if you've never taken the time to explore the various ways the camera alone can change the feeling, tone, or atmosphere within a shot, scene, or even entire movie, then you may not realize just how effective it can be. The camera is a tool unlike any other. It is the lens through which we view the world a creator has made, and in turn, can drastically affect the specific way we experience it, and Caleb seems to understand this. Through shot distance, camera angles, movement, and framing, he both subtly and obviously uses a variety of techniques to change, to varying degrees, how we view the worlds he creates. For example, Caleb commonly changes camera distance to evoke feelings of discomfort, awkwardness, or confusion to emphasize the emotions of a particular character, especially in response to a previous unexpected action or line of dialogue. In If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves and The Homie Never Shares, he employs both close-ups and extreme close-ups to accentuate characters' emotions or the lines delivered. Caleb also takes advantage of framing techniques. In How Objects Feel When You're Raging in a Video Game, Caleb frames the water bottle in the center juxtaposed against himself, who is only partially visible, making Caleb loom menacingly over the water bottle and creating feelings of overwhelming opposition. He also uses shallow focus, an extremely uncommon and underused camera technique in YouTube skits, where either the foreground or background is clear and in focus while the other is blurred out, directing our attention to specific areas. Typically, creators don't think about focus, often simply choosing the default deep focus where the entire shot is in focus. But here, Caleb decides for a more cinematic, and in this case, effective approach. The shallow focus reinforces the ideas I mentioned earlier, but also makes for a more ominous tone, directs the audience to the water bottle, and adds a subtle suggestion of preparation. You can tell the relationship between these two characters without having any context and without even seeing Caleb's face. Small moments like this are what's often missing in many other YouTube videos. Creators can reinforce and sometimes fully establish the emotions and dynamics of a shot just through how the pieces are composed alongside or apart from one another, and they should do so more often. Caleb also takes advantage of one of the defining characteristics of film: movement. Despite often playing multiple or the only roles, his characters constantly interact, but not only through dialogue. They also reveal their emotions through their placement on the screen. Instead of only doing simple medium or close-up shots with his characters framed the same way every time, he mixes it up. Let's put him in the corner and make him small to show his fear. Or let's have a character pop up from out of the frame unexpectedly. Or let's have your character walk impossibly fast and have the background move behind him like he's driving, exaggerating the point of the video even further simply through the visuals. Now, as I hope I've explained, movement is a vital area and one of the most underused and underappreciated components in YouTube videos. Experiment with how to show a character's emotion in a scene through changes in their placement. Experiment with how movement can create absurdity and surprises, or how it can exaggerate elements of your story. I think a lot of skit creators should play more with representing their characters' traits, not only through how they talk and act, but also how they move. For example, sometimes you can get a laugh by how things enter and exit the frame. In What Did You Do to My Drink, Caleb quickly disappears and then reappears, making for a nonsensical but funny visual gag. Like, where did he go? Why was it so fast? It doesn't make any sense, but it's funny, just through the visuals. The questions created here are solely through movement and editing, and if he didn't take into account the visual aspect of film, he would have lost that simple but funny moment. These are just a few examples though. Caleb has hundreds, if not thousands, of instances where he successfully uses the camera and movement to creatively tell jokes in different moments and to varying degrees. He shakes the camera, he moves his characters, he thinks about framing and camera distance. All of these elements greatly contribute to the success of your videos and make them more complex and well-rounded. Now, let's move on to another way he enhances what's on screen, but this time I'll look specifically at the way he brings his characters to life. The acting.
Get out!
What?
Get out of the room! Get out the room!
I don't understand.
Out!
Wow.
Oh.
Caleb often excels in the acting, another area where he particularly separates himself from many other YouTubers. The acting in his videos enhances the dialogue and characters specifically through his performance. He understands when to act extreme and when to act more restrained. Oftentimes, he does both in the same video, portraying multiple characters who not only face shared conflict, but react to that conflict in different ways. Despite these differences though, he's still able to perform believably as any of his characters, slipping us further into the world he's created while also preventing us from being pulled out due to some poor or insincere acting, and he accomplishes this in a variety of ways. As I mentioned earlier, Caleb's characters are often introspective, repeatedly referring to themselves or their situations, and he does a convincing job of reinforcing that idea through his acting as well. Over the years, I've noticed that Caleb's gotten really good at making his voice tremble. You've probably heard it before. In asking anyone for the password, he uses it repeatedly.
Yo, what are you doing?
And throughout other parts of his catalog, you can see just how effective it is. It emphasizes the emotions his character is feeling at the moment, usually while pleading or in disbelief. It not only does a great job of injecting emotion into the dialogue and adding another layer to the comedy, but also provides a subtle look into the character's own perspective on his situation, how he feels about where he is. This introspection also tells us to take a second look at the character, and in doing so, we, in turn, realize how ridiculous the situation is or has become, and makes the character's emotions even more comedic in comparison. To give a better idea of what I mean, here are some other examples of Caleb's trembling voice.
Shut up. What are you doing?
How? I don't know, bro.
No, not Henry Hog.
It's cold outside, dog. Get out.
Hey, take me back. Take me back. I'm just not trying to use my data.
Dog, it's cold.
He asked for extra sauce.
It's cold outside, bro. Come on, man. Come on.
Throughout his videos, Caleb also changes his tone and delivery quite often. In If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves and When You Find Out You're Friends with the Wrong Person, he uses a matter-of-fact delivery to contrast with his violent words that would suggest a much more aggressive tone.
I'm a wasp and I like to hurt people. You know what I do? See, I hit my girl.
Here, Caleb once again shows his tendency to use contrast to create humor, but this time, he's achieving it through his delivery and dialogue. Sometimes though, Caleb goes all out with his acting and has some truly over-the-top performances. In What They Should Do in Anime, Caleb exaggerates the villain's gestures and facial expressions to draw attention to how obviously evil and malevolent anime villains are. Through his acting, he is not only reinforcing, but also exaggerating the purpose of the video. Caleb does a great job of directing our attention through his actions and clearly connecting the characters to the themes and purpose. His over-the-top performance creates a more clear and focused video, allowing us to pay closer attention to what he's trying to say and making the conflicts between characters more obvious, ridiculous, and perhaps most importantly, funny as well. Now that I've described how Caleb's acting accentuates his characters and exaggerates certain characteristics, I want to talk about how Caleb assembles his clips to evoke certain emotions and arrange them into a cohesive and recognizable story through his editing.
It's fun.
All right,
I get it. I mean, I'm sure most of the time it's just self-defense, right? Nope. And they don't really have to even be like bothering me or nothing. I just want to do it. I'll go out of my way to do it.
Here, we have another often overlooked aspect of YouTube videos. The editing, how the visuals and sound are assembled into the final project. People usually notice the overt examples of editing when the editor does something especially outstanding like green screen or special effects, and those do of course have a noticeable impact on our attention. But to me, they overshadow the more important techniques and often drastically change how we experience the video. Instead of appreciating the story or the comedy, we often look at the unexpectedly good effects in a YouTube video and pull our attention away from the original emotion of the piece, and sometimes that's exactly what a creator wants. However, while Caleb's videos don't tend to wow us with his effects, they still have effective editing. It's just more subtle and more in the service of pulling us along the story and either gradually or suddenly shifting emotions. I think that's where Caleb particularly excels in his editing. Though few others do this as successfully or consistently as Caleb, he knows how to assemble his clips into a concise and entertaining video. He rarely leaves any unnecessary footage and understands when to cut and when to let his videos breathe. He's great at leading us through his story, letting it and the tension build and develop, before changing the emotion, tone, and atmosphere of the shot, scene, or sequence. He accomplishes this through several techniques. Across many of his videos, he makes use of reaction shots. He adds shots that reinforce or observe the emotion of the scene through the reactions of surrounding characters. For instance, in If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves, the other insects respond in shock when the wasp reveals his violent mentality.
I like to hurt people. I like it.
Caleb also uses reaction shots to show the feelings of characters without dialogue. In The First Plant to Become a Venus Flytrap, the flytrap has an annoyed reaction to the other plant drinking water. This allows us to get a sense of the dynamics of the scene without hearing a single word.
Man, move! I don't want no more water!
Caleb also often uses snap zooms like in The Office, one of his signature techniques where the camera quickly zooms in.
Would swap it with.
Oh, nah. Grandma.
They wanna know why I don't have no food to eat.
Nah, you good.
Extra bombs at your dry cleaner.
I warned you. Why would you do that? Yes!
He often uses them to focus our attention onto the emotion of a character by focusing on their face. Other times, he uses snap zooms to emphasize something, whether it be a person, an object, or even dialogue. Also in The First Plant to Become a Venus Flytrap, Caleb uses a snap zoom to draw our attention toward and emphasize the flytrap's words, giving them more relevance and power.
I want to eat!
When Caleb uses these zooms, they often have a sense of urgency, a feeling that what is happening is very important or reactionary. Caleb also cleverly incorporates insert shots. In How Fish Deal with Stress, Caleb inserts 2 shots from a human perspective of toy fish floating to the surface of a tub or sink. This particular insert shot is so funny because it draws attention to the fact that these fish aren't real, that Caleb is not a fish, that this whole video is ridiculous, that we can't really understand the thoughts of a fish. So to us, it's basically all artificial, made up and unimportant. And Caleb sums up these ideas through the insert shots. Before seeing those shots, we had suspended our disbelief and treated the situation as real, at least within the context of the video. But the insert shot breaks the fourth wall and reveals a barrier between our world and theirs, and the humor comes in how seriously the living fish react to the dead fish, despite us knowing that this isn't really what fish do. The insert shot creates a lot of contrast between humans and fish by acknowledging that these characters are just fish, and none of this even matters. It's all just some toy fish. Caleb also emphasizes dialogue through his cuts to extreme close-ups. In If Insects Had to Introduce Themselves and How Fast Food Places Act When You Want Some More Sauce, Caleb inserts extreme close-ups to direct our attention to and emphasize the words the characters are saying, often amplifying the emotions associated with those words, like disgust with
Literal doo-doo water?
and anticipation with
Extra sauce.
where he even adds an echo to accentuate the emotion even further. To make sound and conversation specifically feel more organic and realistic, he uses L-cuts and J-cuts. These are techniques where we either let the audio play after the visual it is connected to has left the screen, or hear audio before we see the visual it is connected to.
They don't really feed me at the job, so could I get like a slice of pizza by chance? And they don't really have to even be like bothering me or nothing. I just want to do it. I'll go out of my way to do it.
You see this all the time and you may not even realize it. It's in nearly every movie or TV show or anime you've ever seen. Caleb takes advantage of this in nearly all of his videos to make the characters feel like they're interacting. This is particularly important for Caleb because he often plays multiple roles, so he has to go even further to make it feel like these characters are in the same space or interacting. Otherwise, the characters may not feel as though they are actually speaking to one another, and it could make it feel more truncated and disconnected. Using these cuts, though, makes for fuller, more natural conversations. Caleb is also the creator I most closely associate with the bass sound effect. You've almost definitely heard it before.
Yeah.
That's your address?
That knows your address now. Yeah.
He uses it to signal a sudden realization, a change in perspective, or some kind of impossible or unexpected reveal. He doesn't overuse it though. He withholds it for extreme cases so it doesn't lose its effect. In When You Get Too Serious Playing Basketball, he uses the effect to signal an impossible reveal, a dramatic shift in the assumed or established order.
Hold on.
Nah, man, I wasn't this color, bro. Hey, take me back.
The sound has become so synonymous with these ideas that oftentimes he plays it before even revealing what the sound is signaling, allowing us to quickly imagine what will happen. The comedy arrives in how the reveal compares to our expectations. Oftentimes, the more different they are, the funnier the moment is. Something I've appreciated about Caleb for a while now is that he doesn't overuse music. Many creators feel an emptiness when there's little or no sound and overcompensate for that by inserting parts of, and sometimes even entire or multiple, songs in nearly every video, essentially turning their content into music videos. Oftentimes, this pulls us, or at least me, away from the characters, their situation, and their environment, and forcibly changes the tone of the scene. With Caleb though, the music typically has more of an interwoven, intangible effect. Though it isn't commonly used, it's incorporated well when he thinks it's necessary. He allows the music to support the scene instead of overwhelm it, and he does so by making sure it evokes the same feelings, tone, and atmosphere as the ongoing scene, or shifts it into the same direction as the narrative and characters. For example, in When You Get Too Serious Playing Basketball, Caleb lets the music amplify the Twilight Zone-esque tone.
Hold on. Nah, man, I wasn't this color, bro. Hey, take me back. Take me back, Caleb, come on. Yo, you gotta see a doctor, man. Nah, that's not me. Yo, that's not me.
Sometimes, though, he's trying to draw a contrast between elements, and he wants the music to create a feeling of disorientation. For example, in When the Homie Choking on Something But It's Fire, the music creates a hilarious contrast between the pain and terror of the person choking and the vibrance and joy of the people dancing. As I've said, and Caleb has proven many times, contrast creates comedy. And in this case, he creates contrast primarily through music. Other examples of Caleb's comedic and effective editing include muffling audio to get into a character's head, fade overlays to exaggerate dialogue and signal a tonal shift, fading to black and white for emotional endings, and sometimes he does go for flashiness, and pretty believably too. Like when he disappears in What Did You Do to My Drink, or showing repeated rooms through green screen in basically any main character in detective anime, perhaps his best or most obviously edited video.
Meaning that on his way out, he had to walk through the decoy room and tripped over something, landing directly on that stack of books and papers, thus ruining it. He then laid there in agony for a short while, and then stood up. In an effort to make it look like he was never here, he fixed it. However, he didn't know that this stack, the original stack, wasn't perfectly stacked. So in his effort to make it look like he was never here, we now know for a fact that he was.
So, by now, I've talked about his dialogue, I've talked about his characters and his stories, I've talked about his visuals, his acting, and his editing. But how do all of these elements combine? How does it all come together?
I think you missed one detail.
Not likely. You caught, bro.
I'm not even here.
What? What?
I was never there. You've been FaceTiming me this entire time.
No. What?
This entire time.
I'm actually in my house, chilling.
This part is a bit tricky, and it may even seem a little redundant, but where the second part was about how he enhances the elements in the first part to make a more complete and well-rounded video, this part is about the application and combination of all of the previous elements into something identifiable, creating a consistency across videos, and knowing when and when not to do certain things. For me, the synthesis is how we complete the video, how we take everything we've learned and created up to this point and combine it into a full idea, a recognizable concept. If you've been paying close attention, you may have noticed that some videos were examples in multiple sections, and that shows that these videos work on a variety of levels and successfully combine multiple areas, whether it be the dialogue, characters, narrative, camera work, acting, or editing. You can't hope to make good videos through only one of these components, and Caleb knows this. When he combines some or all of the previous elements well, say the cinematography, the acting, and the sound effects, he creates a cohesion. And with Caleb, all of the previous elements I mentioned earlier often coalesce into concise, memorable, and hilarious sequences and entire videos. Sometimes he uses editing to create an unexpected contrast of dialogue. Sometimes he combines sound and cinematography to direct our emotions to a certain character's mindset.
You want some, bro?
And other times he expertly connects dialogue, characters, and acting to represent or satirize certain ideas.
Now, what will it be? The key or destruction?
It's these combinations that really make moments and scenes pop with his particular and undeniable style. But nothing epitomizes everything I've said about filmmaking as a whole, and Caleb's videos specifically, more than his signature plot twists, which are, in my eyes, Caleb's trademark technique and perhaps the most effective and specific contributor to his place atop the YouTube skit community. The plot twists come to fruition in different ways. Compounded by the editing that I described earlier, his plot twists are sometimes predictable and other times unexpected. Sometimes they're ironic, other times they're outrageous. Sometimes they change characters, other times they change the story. But they are almost always entertaining. In Superhuman Interview, and especially Superhuman Interview 2, you know the plot twists are coming, but they're still funny. Like when he says, "Yeah, let me not surprise." In When You Take Basketball Too Seriously, he skillfully combines camera work, dialogue, characters, acting, and sound effects to make for a far more impactful and surprising reveal that capitalizes on the emotions built up in the earlier parts. In When You Find Out You're Friends with the Wrong Person, Caleb creates a plot twist through our understanding of his content. Having seen Caleb's previous videos and understanding his tendencies, we expected the man on the right to be the straight man and to watch in shock as the other man escalated, but that's not what happens. Instead, the roles are reversed when it's revealed that the guy on the right is so nonchalantly a domestic abuser.
See, I hit my girl.
In It's at the Bottom of the Bag, after a series of increasingly confusing findings, a strange, half-naked person comes out and the problem escalates even further. It completely changes how we view the owner of the bag. At first, we thought he was just a normal guy asking a friend for a small favor, but as more and more objects came out, that judgment changed. And when a whole human escaped and we saw his angry reaction to that realization, we had an even more drastic shift in judgment. He accomplished this through many of the techniques I talked about earlier. I'm sure you get the point by now. Caleb has gotten very good at crafting and leading us through plot twists. But that's not all. His videos have much more to applaud, with certain recurring motifs that consistently get a laugh out of me. All in all, Caleb's videos work for a variety of reasons, but for me, what makes him the best is that he often isn't satisfied with just the dialogue or the characters or the story. Instead, he not only has a variety of methods for improving those elements as they are, but also creatively enhances them through his visuals, acting, and editing, offering a consistent level of quality and creating a recognizable and entertaining style. I hope I've done a pretty good job of explaining why CalebCity's videos work so well, and I also hope that I've inspired some creators to look at their own work and see how they can improve on these aspects through increased effort and creativity. But if you want to know more, here's a great video you may have already seen on visual comedy by Every Frame a Painting. It dissects the unique style of director Edgar Wright to explore more creative ways to tell stories and deliver jokes rather than the simplistic and boring approaches without any interesting visuals or sound. I'd just like to see more amateur filmmakers and content creators take the time to try new things. You know, explore unique ways to tell your jokes. Move the camera, cut more purposefully, think about what you're trying to achieve. There are so many more levels to comedy than dialogue, and though you can be successful with that alone, that doesn't mean it's the best or most fulfilling way to make your videos. Sure, challenging yourself to being different can be frustrating at times, but that difficulty makes the success much more satisfying when you do finally achieve it. Don't just hold the camera in front of your face for every shot. I know it can be tempting to take the easy, unambitious route or to do what you've seen as successful, but don't just sit in front of the camera and say stuff. It's already hard enough to separate yourself, especially if you're doing things the same way as everyone else. So if you're going to make something in film or even just quick videos on YouTube, just be creative. Not only in the story, but also in the delivery and presentation. Thanks for watching.
I'm gonna slide you. That's what I'm gonna slide you.